one more minute and we'll go ahead and get started. Really appreciate you all jumping on the webinar today, and looking forward to hearing some of your questions as we go through. Just do a little housekeeping for you all. I also have Dan Kemistruck, who's our manager in engineering. He will be assisting me. So if any questions you want to ask, please post them in there. If there's something quick he can answer, he'll do it in there. And at the end, we'll have other time for questions, and we'll do our best to get it covered as much as possible then. All right. We'll just wait another minute here. Oh. Good. I'm seeing lots of friendly faces, people who we know kind of in the past, both as customers and as partners online, and some new people on there as well. So pretty excited. Nice to meet everybody there. Hopefully, I'll talk with you guys in person at some point, or somebody within Agile IT. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you again for joining. I'm Conrad Agermont, CEO here at Agile IT. I also have our manager, Dan Kemistruck, who manages our service delivery team. He'll be answering most of the questions online. Please don't be shy. Post your questions in there, and we'll do our best to get them answered in today's session. The main thing we wanted to really focus on today was, as the title describes, really filling in the gaps between AWS and Azure, the kind of debate. One thing that we're really not going to cover, sometimes I think it's more important to say what you're not going to do or you're not going to cover, to make sure that the expectations are set right. There is so much content out there today that talks about the technical differences. There's also a lot of content out there today that talks about the price. And I'll cover a little bit, but really what I want to do today is focus on some of those topics that are common, but there's something a little bit that's missing that we feel is important as we work with a lot of our customers in both the evaluation, the planning, and deployment to Microsoft Azure, as well as Amazon Web Services. So we really feel that we have a good amount of knowledge that we can share with those, but at that same time, there's only so much information that you can do on a session like this, or else it's just a spaghetti mess of information. So we'll do our best to really walk everybody through it through the session today. So again, we really want to cover what are some of those little bitty issues that kind of get people tripped up, either when they're doing their evaluation or how they're doing the evaluation. So what is the kind of totality we need to view? So hopefully this gives you some more information to help you make your decisions, or to help you with your planning as you move along your journey into the cloud. Now, one of the things that we felt as Agile IT of why we feel this is important, and why we wanted to share this content with the world, is that we really wanted to build a community of managed service customers. So while we do project work for our customers and taking them to the cloud or making their cloud deployment better, we really see that we want our customers to be close. So we really want to share more information. So for customers that we do licensing for Office 365 or Azure, we actually do these kind of weekly tech talks for free as a part of their service, so they can just be closer to us, and we want our customers to work with one another. So again, as we learn this information, we really want to share it out with the public, because it's just goodwill, right, in the market space. As well as, we're seeing both customers in enterprises, whether they're very IT focused or maybe not so IT focused, they know that the cloud evolution it's not coming. I mean, we're already on the train. It's already moving. So what is those next set of capabilities that they want to do with the business? So I'll talk a little bit about that, but in terms of today, we're really focusing on kind of the more pure infrastructure as a service capabilities, and some other elements as well when looking at your cloud provider between AWS and Azure. So on that note, when we look at kind of the pizza stack, this is not new. This has been around for quite some time, but I always like the visual that's there in terms of control and responsibility. And for those of you that have not seen this before, really what this is trying to say is that when you're on premise, you have a lot of control, and with that, a lot of responsibility. So they're really paired with one another. And as you move towards the right, as you go from having less responsibility, which is nice, right? If you're thinking, hey, when I'm on-prem, and if I have super high availability requirements or business continuity requirements, I have to make sure I have not just one power source, not just two power sources, but I have to know how much gasoline is available for the generator. You know, how long will it run? When was the last time we ran the gasoline? Is the gasoline going to get old? Do I refresh it? Do I have to run it every once in a while? You know, I think about, you know, IT systems, who thinks about gas? Well, if you're in large data centers, either in yourself or who your current colo is today, I would be asking questions about their gas because it's a big part of what you do. So anyway, as you move down the line, you care less and less about those things, but also lose a little bit of control. So sometimes I don't mind. You know, sometimes that loss of control is actually good for me, maybe because they have better systems for control. But these are the things that you have to think about. Now, along that stack, as you go towards the right, this also kind of changes a bit who the deciders are for that platform. So if you think about going to an infrastructure as a service environment, yes, you would think that the IT people are, you know, super involved and they're doing it, but the developers are involved as well, because this could impact how their development environment. If you don't have a development environment, maybe it's not as important to you, but if you have third-party tools, well, is it supported on this platform? So they're kind of a part of that picture too. Now, it's always the business and the finance and legal teams are always involved, no matter what you're looking at, because they have to take a look at the agreements, who owns IP, who, you know, they have to go through the rules of engagement for any decider. So really, when we think about the deciders, I'm not talking about the VP or even, you know, the CIO or the CO, but, you know, of the teams of deciders, the IT people who say, you know what, our process can't run there, or our technology won't go there, or it's very challenging because this vendor doesn't allow us to have a large range of IP ports where the other vendor does. You know, can we work around? If the answer is no, man, that's just going to stop us right there. So there are some technical aspects that they have to go do to make that view. On the PaaS side, where platform as a service, where it's really geared more towards developers traditionally, the developers are really, really the big deciders there. Because for them, they're going to say, hey, this API is going to work for us. This data scheme is going to work for us. In terms of migrating our application, it's going to work for us. But IT is a heavy influencer because there's some things that developers don't always think about. And the key areas really are governance, right, and data management and data security, restorability. These are the things that, you know, the IT, you still need somebody who's very IT in nature, who thinks in this kind of world where I always view developers as being very artistic, right? They look at an open landscape and think, how do I create it in this way and really create, you know, the data relationship that we want. They really think about that, where an IT person is really, you know, more edgy around, hey, well, how do I restore this while the data goes down? What if there's a change in our governance policies, and they understand how to work with, you know, the SLAs and the attorneys, because that's kind of what they do, where the developers really not interested in any of that. So they're key influencers, but really the developers are the ones in charge of making the platform decision. Yes, that API looks good, it's going to get us what we want. And then lastly, from the SaaS side, again, remember I said business is always involved, but a lot of times in a SaaS solution, you know, the one that everybody talks around is about CRM. So if your sales staff says, you know, the things that are in Dynamics 365 are really what I need for CRM, and Salesforce does give me these other things, you know, I'm having a tough time deciding. Maybe they do both, great in both, and the IT teams raise their hand to go, easy, we have Office 365, which has Azure AD, so Dynamics 365 is a better choice for us. And they go, all right, well, that makes it easy for us. Or they could take another route, and they say, hey, we're not on Office 365. We use this other platform, and so maybe that's not going to be really key for us. And so again, these are the key influencers. The reason I talk about this is that, you know, a lot of times for customers, they commonly look at two specific areas when making a decision. Very, very common. I see these white papers all the time. I see a lot of other webinars all the time. In fact, I am almost thinking about doing a webinar on it as well, which is around price. They say it's price-driven and it's technical-driven. And sometimes I think, well, that's a bit of an easy cop-out, right? You just look at the price of the VM and think that's it. But there's all of these other kind of hidden costs that go around that. I'll cover bits of that as we continue to go through. And if you don't look at those hidden costs, you will be in a state in 6 months or a year or 24 months, and I'll talk about kind of timeline as we go through this, where you'll say, maybe this was a mistake. Maybe this costs more than I thought. It's this big swing on the pendulum. You go to the other side and you go, oh, it's too expensive, I have this, and it's only because you didn't set your expectations right, and because you didn't think about all of the other costs that are included when making this adoption change that normally you would. Again, I'll discuss it as we go through it. So when we take a look at the cloud landscape, and this is just our view of it, and a lot of these are opinions that I've crafted through the years at both working at Microsoft, and I worked with other software companies focused in life science, and looking at all these other places. So I've been doing cloud for quite some time, both on Amazon and in Azure. We do this all the time as well. And when you look at the landscape as a whole, right, it's easy to just say, oh, there's these two vendors. And when you look at from the Microsoft capability, so those in the blue, you look at first the kind of key areas: productivity, business, BI, identity, so on and so forth. And I would say 95% of all organizations have something like this mentally mapped. It may not be drawn out in this way, but this is the way they're thinking about it. They know that they have these capabilities. So when you look at vendors of where they fall inside of this landscape and where are they with the buckets, these are things that we think about all the time. And we get asked pretty frequently from customers that say, hey, which cloud is right for me? Well, first off, let's talk about your business, and let's talk about your processes, and let's talk about where are you going as a business? Those are the important questions. Everything else kind of falls in behind it. But when you start to look at, well, what am I currently using? If I'm already using 2 or 3 things from one vendor, a lot of times I start to make decisions around that. Very natural. Most people want to reduce the number of vendors that they have to deal with only because of contracts, events, training, those sorts of things. So we find, Microsoft is very complete in terms of the different buckets that they go in. When you drill in and the licensing schemes, how you train, that's the next level of questions. But it's important for us to say that, as Agile IT, when we look at the landscape of the, we also call this our technology palette. The kind of pictures you can create when pulling from a palette like this. We can kind of help guide customers towards the right solutions based off of their business-specific needs, including any type of business requirements they have around. Sometimes it's around cost, mostly it's around value. A lot of times it's around capabilities and roadmap, and their existing staffing skills has a huge part around their roadmap of where they're going to go next. So one thing that's quite popular, Gartner. So we have a relationship with Gartner. We work with them, and they're very broad throughout the market space and landscape. One of the things I did before pulling this up was I looked at 2013. I said, well, hey, what does 2013 look like? And unfortunately, I just didn't publish it on here. But for 2013 to 2016, there's some changes. The one no change was where AWS is. So for the last 3 years, this was through August of last year, AWS still top right corner. Microsoft was a little lower and about halfway towards the left. So they've been making strides. So you kind of like it when you see a vendor moving, right? Moving in a direction that you want. So that gives us some view that, hey, and again, this is just cloud, infrastructure as a service. There's a lot of other magic quadrants from other areas where Microsoft and AWS are also making strides in other areas. But the other big change is that the other vendors at the bottom left are moving all around and really shifting more towards the left. So you really see that the comparison between these two vendors, it is two. So oftentimes people will ask me, well, what about Rackspace? What are these other ones? And really everybody else is just doing colo. And unfortunately that's the way it is. And so most people are kind of looking at these other managed services, and they're kind of trying to keep you bolted down into those kind of colo and caged areas. But for the purposes of this, they're very comparable between AWS and Microsoft in terms of their focus into the cloud, which is where you really want to go see for these sorts of vendors. And I'm sure you go to any other session, they're going to talk a lot about the same thing. Now, the other interesting one, there's a company called RightScale, and they do a lot of automation. They have a lot of automation tools, and they created this interesting report that I found pretty nice, and a lot of the content is out there, and they reference some other information from like Forrester or whatnot. But I really like the way they categorize certain cloud. Where you were in your cloud journey, whether you're just beginning or you've been doing it for a while, or you're kind of cloud focused and you're moving forward. Really the top 3 areas that you see around here are security, costs, well, security costs are the two major ones that that everybody's focused on, and then really your skills is the third one that's often kind of brought up between these areas. So some of this just makes perfect sense. You know, in the beginning when you're first getting started out, security is your number one focus because you don't know. It's the big place that you're really, really worried about, and you should. You should spend time on the security of your environment, and security is not a feature, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And your cost, you're not so worried because you're just getting started, so you're not really spending as much money. And again, remember I said you really should try and pay attention to this as you go along, because as you see, as you move forward and you become a cloud-focused organization where you're doing a lot of stuff there, and it's your, hey, we do everything in the cloud first, only on-prem when we absolutely have to. Oh, we're spending a lot of money there. You know, where's all this money, you know, coming from? And a lot of times, again, you know, this is very common that people start to compare between what they paid for one computer on-prem versus one virtual machine in the cloud. And it's very natural for people to look at those two things and go, hey, it's just cheaper for me to buy a box. And they forget about all those other costs around, you know, the power and the pipe and the networking and oh, my high availability requirements, and oh, my compliance requirements, oh, my security requirements. We just have it behind a single key, where the cloud environment has, you know, lots of other security that I can get you know, report on. So it's not a really equal type of thing. Plus, when that one box goes down, I'm done. If my VM for some reason has a problem up in the cloud, I just restart it. It goes to some other piece of hardware. If that one hardware, which I don't really know or don't really see had a problem, it just gets moved somewhere else. And that's the flexibility that you get. So typically I tell customers that if you look at on-prem versus cloud, and again, you know, depending on what VM you get and the price structure, it all varies. But for the sake of this argument, look at them as the same, right? They're the same cost. Moving something from on-prem into cloud, let's say it's the same cost. It costs me exactly the same. So now my decision is really around flexibility. There's good reasons sometimes to have things on-prem. Whether there's a legal requirement, you know, you could be in a country and have a piece of data that requires it to stay in that country and stay under lock and key. So there's some legal requirements that you have to deal with. That doesn't mean everything has to be that way. And those are things that, again, you go through your agreements, and sometimes you have an agreement with a customer that says it has to be on-prem. You know, there's opportunities to make changes to that agreement in the future, but you have to reassure them that the policies and the management are going to be there. So those things are always important to do. So that's all a part of that journey. If you will, you know, when you go through this, you also start to see that you know, trying to address how do we get to the cloud becomes a very critical question. And it's not always straightforward. It's not always just a migration. It's not always just a lift and shift. It could be that I'm doing 15 different styles of movement because I have 50 different types of data. I have VMs, I have databases, I have application data, I have personal profile data, I have compliance data, I have financial data that has to fit SOX, and so I have different types of data, applications, services, connection points, relationships that I have to deal with. It can be quite overwhelming. So there's kind of different ways, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, of viewing that so that you can have a nice journey. It's not a, you know, I don't just get to the cloud in 1 year for some organizations. Some smaller, medium-sized, it might be possible, but it's a journey that you're going to go through. And there's a lot of organizational change that goes through that as well. One thing that isn't often discussed is user experience, because hey, it's just IT, right? What's the problem? But IT people are people too. I'm sure there's a T-shirt printed somewhere on some tech conference that has that. If not, this recording will be a trademark evidence. Anyway, IT people are people too, and they also have this thing about intuitiveness. And the more intuitive it is for a particular type of engineer, the more productive they can be. Now, as much as we want to move to a very automated world, a very kind of scripted world, many times you still start at the control panel, or you validate things in the control panel, or you have a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 help desk or support environment. They're not highly skilled scripting people, so they go into a control panel. So still very control panel, you know, focused. And again, just like I said, there was RightScale, the one report that I talked about. They have a kind of an abstracted view. so that you can have departmental billing and kind of more segmentation and have a multi-cloud kind of a view, which is kind of nice. And that might be in your future. It may not be in your future, but you still should look at the vendor to see if they're investing in their environment. I would say that Microsoft really is leading there. I mean, this is somebody else's representation of them leading. And again, because IT administrators are going to go into this, software engineer is going to go into this, somebody who's a software engineer / IT person in DevOps is going to go into this. And the billing people go into this because sometimes they have to go into it to get the bill. If you do billing through Agile IT, you wouldn't go through this portal. We have our own method of giving you the invoice that's customized for you. So, you know, we have a different way to do that. But at the end of the day, you may still go into the portal, you being, you know, an IT person that needs to go in there and utilize a brand new service. You want to try it out. So, you know, usability makes a key impact because they're just not wasting time. You want them to figure it out without having to read a bunch of books and go to YouTube. I shouldn't say books, I should say web articles is what they're using. Anyway, so quite important thing to take a look at. So again, if you go with the premise that, let's say the pricing is equal. Now they're not. And part of that's because their offerings aren't equal. So I can't, you know, if in AWS I can get a 4-core, 16 gig virtual machine. Oh, let me go look in Azure. Oh, it's cool. 4-core. Oh, there's no one with 8 gigs. There's one with 8. You know, there's none with 16 gigs. I could do 8 gigs, but I need 16 gigs. Oh, that gives me 8 processors. So their offerings are a little bit different. The processors that they have are a little bit different, even between the classes that you buy. So you're not going to always get a straight one-for-one type of thing. I mean, it's like getting, you know, 2 different type of sodas. One's made by one vendor, another one's made by another. They call it the same. People perceive it to be the same, but it's not the same. You know, I don't know if I get in trouble for doing this, but you go to a restaurant and you say, oh, do you have a Coke? And they say, is Pepsi going to be fine? I say, no, I'm not. I don't like Pepsi. I like Coke. So no, that's not fine. So I ask for a Coke. So, you know, people perceive them to be the same, but they're not the same. So making a judgment call off of just price and VM style by itself is not really easy to do. At the end of the day, you have to kind of pick the right VM. And even there, it's not simple. You say, well, I need something with 4-core and 8 gigs of RAM, or 4-core and 16 gigs of RAM. Okay, but do you need that with fast disks? Do you need that with networking, with high-performance networking between a cluster of computers for like high-performance computers? Do you just need it for a file server? Lots and lots more questions. So it's easy to get started. Get a credit card, go online, kick up a virtual machine, but that's probably not going to be anywhere close to a good proof of concept that's going to give you a flavor of the cost, the flavor of capabilities. And that's sometimes where customers get kind of run themselves out of the environment. They say, well, I went there, I created a VM in Azure, created a VM in AWS, and they were both terrible, right? And you say, well, what was your performance requirements? I don't know, like on-prem. What do you have there? Like, oh, super fast computer, or, you know, a RAID 10 environment on a SAN, super fast, you know, fiber channel connections. What did you buy? Oh, I bought a machine that was, you know, couple, you know, $10 a month, you know, that's not really the same, you know, so that's where you have to kind of do like for like, and even there, when you know as an IT person what your IT process is and structure, what it mentally looks like today on-prem, and you try and do the same thing in the cloud, that's big mistake number 5, if you will, because it's not like for like. You have to take into consideration, oh, that's going to need a different storage type, and if you have an application that's a fixed application, sometimes the vendor tells you, you know, like SAP will tell you, oh, you need, for this vendor, you need to get this kind of setup. And so they give you a guide, but then even there, it depends on how much data you have and how many people are connecting in. And that's going to tell you whether RDP in there is going to work for you, or if not, I have to use some other solution. You know, you have to take a look at your geographies and the cost between the different geographies. This is both for AWS and Amazon. The cost between the different geographies within their own data centers are different. So a lot of stuff to go through. It's not simple, but hopefully this information is going to make you at least knowledgeable that I have to take a look at these areas. There is a calculator that's available to both. I know this is very simple, but here's the thing. When you go into the calculator and you rough out both, remember, they're not like for like, so you're not going to be able to get apples to apples kind of comparison on price because the environment's going to be a little bit different. This budgeting should happen. It can give you an idea before, kind of a rough estimate of what my cost will be. You know you're going to the cloud. At some point, you're going to have to test out and prototype those more kind of challenging workloads. After that, then you can go back to the budget calculator and see, is this good? If you have the time to then take a month where you create your test environment, testing out the performance and kind of near active usage, take a month, because then you can actually get a real invoice. And so you can create this can happen in both Amazon and AWS, where you can say, hey, off this billing ID, in Azure where it's called your subscription ID, I want to do these things to it. And at the end, you could take a look at the price and go, okay, this was only 20% of what I would actually run, and so this is now kind of my cost. And now it gives you a more real view of what I'm actually going to be getting in my bill, through a multiple. Right now you can say, well, it's only a quarter, so multiply it by 4, it'll be that. But if you had a domain controller in there, I'm not going to have 4 domain controllers. So you still need to make some adjustment, but it gives you a really good view of what a real cost and invoice will look like. And oftentimes, if you need to do it faster, you're just getting started and doing it, your results may not be as accurate as you would like for your future planning. Anyway, those are some things that I would recommend. Calculator is good just to get started. After POC, calculator gives you a little bit more details, but really running a good POC, something that's near production, at least to a percentage, looking at that bill afterward will give you a much better idea of how you do that cost in the future. And I'll talk about some pricing changes or things to think about here in a couple of minutes. So again, high level, it's all equal. All right. Now, it totally is not equal. Right? So the products are very different, the services are different. But if you go into the mindscape that it's all equal, not just between Amazon and Azure, but if it's all equal between Amazon, Azure, and on-prem world, right? So if you think all of that is equal and start off with that premise and then work down from that, you can start to quickly narrow down on their own what is the right solution for me. The reason I'm saying this is that a lot of customers start off with the premise that cloud is not going to be enough. Cloud is not going to give me what I need. And okay, I guess I need to go search for it. And they start off with this very negative view. And it's really hard when you start off that way. It's like, you're going on you're building a new relationship, you're dating somebody, you want to start with the premise that this is going to work out. And it makes everything work better. It may not work out, and you may need to go somewhere else, but at least you're starting with a positive premise versus like, I'm going to go on this date a few more times, totally not going to work out. You could be a person that does that, and it might explain a lot of poor dating experiments. Anyway, so these are the things that you want to go in is thinking, okay, they're all kind of equal. They all have compute. They all have storage. They all have virtual networking. And by all, again, on-prem, AWS, and Azure. And you're thinking, okay, they're all kind of equal. So as I go through this, let me just find the places where there isn't a fit. And when that happens, it's an easy way to say no, right? So start off with that premise. It makes things much, much easier. Now, when you think about some common decision points, and some of these are, sometimes they're no-brainers to some. Other people are like, yeah, I guess I should have thought of that. The one is, I only want to do things with Microsoft for Windows and Office. Now, for the Azure side, it's a real bummer. Sometimes this comes because somebody had a real personal thing, like we don't do Microsoft, we just do open source, we do that, we just made a personal decision. And it could be they maybe had a bad experience. It could be that they came from a university and through years they decided this is what they want to do. Most enterprises don't think that way. Small, mid-sized business sometimes think that way. When you look at customers who are mostly a development organization, they do things on Linux. I'm really pushing things these first two on the AWS side, and they're we do a lot of Linux, do a lot of open source, so we kind of come from that world. It's a very natural transition for them to think about Amazon Web Services because it's not Microsoft, so it feels like that's where we should be. However, if you look at what Microsoft has been doing on the open source side, the Linux deployment, 5 years ago there was no, well, don't quote me on this, but I think about 5 years ago there was no Linux option. For us, it was really, really limited. Now it's equal, right? You can find the distributions that they need. Microsoft puts it up front. The cost for it is cheaper than the Windows one. I mean, it's there, right? They really invested a lot on on making sure that these Windows distributions or applications or services, you can even get a hosted MySQL database on there. So Microsoft is really getting out there because they're being less focused on just the religion of their own product and more about thinking about the business need of their customers. And that's a really big shift for them. So it's a place I would say right now for that type of customer that normally the winner is AWS, but man, Microsoft is competing. Right, so they're getting a lot of customers in that area. So again, things to think about on that area. Direct integration with Microsoft technologies is a place where Amazon has done a really good job of, Microsoft it has a huge customer base, lots of technologies that they have. They still have a relationship with Microsoft to do the integration that they need. So they have some integration, but of course Microsoft Azure has the most, right? They build these technologies. It works really well with one another. So for those customers that maybe come from the quote-unquote Microsoft shop, we're a Microsoft shop. We do everything Microsoft. We develop in Microsoft. I could say it's just not in here, but it's the flip side. There, it's Microsoft is the winner, and AWS is bummer for them. They're the Microsoft shops, just like they do that. And I would say that from a mindset, from a how things look. So if you do Windows Server 2016, you do Exchange Server 2016, you're using Office 365, you're using Skype for Business Online for your phones. When you log into the Azure Portal, it just looks like all of it. It feels the same way. So the look and feel is very consistent. Man, you can say that for Microsoft products 10 years ago, that different products would look and behave the same. And now they do. They integrate with one another. They look a lot like one another. Sometimes they're a little off, but for the most part, you can see the momentum where all that. So for somebody who is managing lots of different systems with a short amount of people, a small number of people, and if you're already a Microsoft shop, Azure really is the winner for you because it fits. And most likely it goes to the next point too, which is really around your licensing. If you already have existing Microsoft licenses, and if you call yourself a Microsoft shop, most likely you have a significant investment in there. The licensing structure from that is going to also be very beneficial into Azure. I'll talk about that in the next slide. But the other thing that AWS really has done is something called reserved instances. Typically in infrastructure as a service, as you pay for compute capacity on demand. Well, when you run something like a domain controller or a file server, you just turn it on and just leave it on. And you just expect it to always be there. So the nice thing that AWS had really early on is they said, well, for that kind of a thing, why don't you just tell us you want it for a year or two? We bind that relationship and this lower price point, discounted price point for you for that virtual machine. And now you've made a commitment. We lower the price, and you're on it for the next year or two, or I think they even go 3 years. So that's a reserved instance. And currently, Microsoft doesn't have the same thing for a reserved instance where you can have that long-term relationship. Now, they do have something called hybrid use license, which I'll talk about in a second. The other piece is third-party support. This is, again, now it's not definitive, but I'll say where both are kind of the yes column. Microsoft has done a good job in really reaching out to more people. It used to be, I think it was 2 years ago, that SAP was not supported SAP was not supported on Azure, only on AWS. Recently, I think maybe 6 months ago or so, where that changed. So they've both been very good at reaching out to third-party applications and products, and really trying to make sure that they're supported on their cloud platform. And that is just super beneficial to customers out there, that these vendors are really reaching out and saying, hey, make sure that you're fully supported on our platform. So again, you will find from time to time some applications that don't work on Azure or AWS, sometimes both, because that cloud vendor or that third-party application hasn't gotten there. If they don't have a roadmap to do either one or offering it as a SaaS-based service, I think that it's pretty obvious you need to think about a new vendor at some point because they're way behind. Okay, so just some other points. The thing about AWS is that where they're the leader in infrastructure as a service. Now, at this point in time, today, in 2017, that seems to be in flux, right? Because there's now more writings saying that Microsoft's a leader, AWS still a leader. Both are really growing, still at a rapid rate. So I'm just going to say, for the for the sake of fairness, that it's a toss-up. And what a difference that is now. I mean, 2 years ago, AWS was just blowing it away. So now it's even. So sometimes this makes it even harder, right? Because sometimes you want to bet on the winner of who it's going to be. And I'm just to be somewhat impartial, I'll say that, again, if you go through all of these pieces we've been talking about, it should get you closer towards the best answer for you and the things that you need kind of moving forward. Okay, so the one thing in AWS is that I really think that there's just a little bit more options from a compute sense, right? There's lots of virtual machines, and this isn't about the virtual machine type, but if you want to do other types of compute things where they have things like spot instances where you can say, hey, I want to be able to throw these types of I need this type of compute capacity. I want to pay at a cheaper rate, but if the VM just dies and goes away, my application can handle that. So that's for these kind of autonomous compute things like search indexes and whatnot. Spot instances is a whole other thing. Azure really doesn't have the same type of thing. This is a place where they're a little different between Azure and AWS. I think the AWS just has a couple more. They're still very focused on what developers do, and you kind of have to code it specific to them to go do it. So again, if that's kind of a need you have as an application developer, I would take a look at both vendors, but AWS has just a little bit more today. Recently, VMware came out with a kind of a relationship, still currently in preview, between VMware and Amazon. So this is where they're trying to represent the same stack relationship as what Microsoft has with Hyper-V and Azure. So trying to have that same kind of hybrid portability between the two. I think VMware found that running their own platform was pretty challenging. I don't think they were going to be able to kind of catch up to the capabilities of where AWS and Azure was. So I think it was kind of a logical fit for them to say, hey, let's partner together to do that. It'll work, it'll function. However, is it going to have the same rate of innovation and cohesiveness between those two versus something on Hyper-V and Azure? Probably not. But if you've made a significant investment to to VMware, but have this need, that's probably your next step, right? Is to take that approach. Not to say that Microsoft couldn't do the same thing with you, but I think most people are going to kind of take that step. I would caution you that don't try and, if you're on VMware today and you're going to try this out, be open to all possibilities, because maybe maybe in the short term, this probably is the quickest, best route for you, but long term, is this going to be the ideal strategy for you in 5 years? 5 years, things change a lot, right? But you don't want to kind of cement yourself into a strategy that might be even more harmful to you downstream. But it's great to see that this relationship between VMware and AWS actually got created. I mean, I was thinking that they would go that way, and it's great that they did that, and we'll see what goes with them next. Now, price is another one. I know. I kind of keep going back and forth on this. I keep saying, hey, it's all the same, but it's not the same. And now I'm saying, oh, it's not the same. There is, right? The place where you can really look at core pricing is around storage. And this really is kind of a race to the bottom. And even there, it's not just such a race to the bottom, but both AWS and Microsoft are continuously splitting things up, right? They are not just saying, hey, it's storage costs, but now there's difference between regular storage costs and fast storage. Fast storage, regular, and now slow archival storage. So it gets just cheaper and cheaper. But at the same time, you have to think about where that storage is going to go. You have to think about how it's going to be accessed and who has to be accessed by. So while it's great to have more options, cheaper, more moderately priced storage, it does require you to think about, well, heck, I used to put everything in just one big file server. Yes, only 5 or 10% of the data was actually used, and of that, only 30% of my staff actually used it, but I just shoved it all over there. Well, how's that working for you? It's a hot mess. These are common conversations with our customers. So really, it's in that time of moving into the cloud, it's a time of cleansing, if you will, in terms of restructuring your storage. And by doing that, it gives you want at least the same or better access to data at a cheaper, more manageable cost. So, it's not just the end price, if you will, but it's how is that price being structured and moved around. On the Microsoft Azure side, there's a lot of a core piece of this really is the dominance around Office 365 in the messaging and productivity space. The growth in that share of the market for Microsoft has really just enabled to say, hey, now that you're there, all of that is really using Azure Active Directory under the covers. So now that you're doing that, you can now apply policies and governance to other aspects of your data center. Some of it that doesn't even need to be in Azure. But for the things that are in Azure, man, you get all of these other benefits. So it really allows you to tie into those other pieces. And even in being Office 365, if you did that deployment but decided to use Okta instead of Azure AD, but you wanted to still do a policies available in Azure, you still get some of that capability. So that's another place where Microsoft's done great, is that they're not just doing it their own. Even though there's something they do, they allow other vendors to kind of plug in. Dropbox can do that instead of OneDrive for whatever reason. So they're allowing this kind of mix match, if you want. So while we talk about the Microsoft solution is integrated as a whole, customers have options to move things in and out, which is really nice for them. And again, they're just kind of building on that. The other thing is that Microsoft is leveraging their other properties as well, whether it's SQL Server, but again, remember I talked about you can have managed MySQL as well. So they can run and operate that, and you just say, hey, I need a database. So you don't actually have to think about a server anymore, if you will, and patching the server, and updating the server, and securing the server. They do everything. You just ask for a database, and they get it to you. I talked a little bit about the hybrid use benefit. This is very new for the Microsoft side. This is really for those customers who say, hey, I already have a Windows license today. And if you have a Windows license today with software assurance, no matter how it's licensed, don't quote me on some of the licensing things. If I'm off a bit, I apologize. But what it says is that if you take this license and you deploy it in Azure, well, now your compute cost is no longer the same cost as if you didn't have it. Now you get a price break where it's the same cost as what the Linux, right? Because with Linux, there's no license cost on top of it. So it's this kind of base compute price. So if you bring your hybrid use license, basically you're bringing your own Windows license with you and sticking it in Azure, you're now going to get a discounted benefit. So it could be up to 40%. Again, depending on your VM and your license and what you do, it might vary. So please, I'm not guaranteeing you 40% off on that, but there's going to be a savings. So this is one thing that you should say, hey, what is my license today? I am running Windows licenses on VMware, physical machines, Hyper-V. I have these Windows licenses. How would that help me with my costs in Azure? Maybe it's a benefit to you. Maybe it's not as a big benefit, but something you should definitely look at as you move forward on your environment. I already talked about the portal and intuitiveness. I'll just give a quick peek at that here in a second. The other part is around training and documentation. We do quite a bit ourselves at Agile IT with our own engineer and our own staff, both for that, for that. So we're able to do, we do the training on both environments. So we see both types of content. And I will tell you that from our own engineers that we see that it's just far superior on Microsoft. Their investments in documentation has been phenomenal. In both areas, whenever there's a problem, you do an internet search and find a lot of the materials that you want. But the nice thing is that the material is clear, it's there, so a lot of the engineering training has been really, really good. Okay, so when you look at just the portal, just a quick peek, right? I didn't want to do a whole demo and spend a lot of time there this time. So the portal today, if you just look at EC2, so this is their compute, just looking at a few compute nodes. This is the look and feel of it. Obviously there's more things. Hit the blue buttons where you go to launch an instant. You can automate this whole process using things like Chef and Puppet to automate those processes. In the Microsoft Azure Portal, again, their look and feel is a little nicer. They have these panel tiles that they have when you log in and can go to some common kind of favorite services. And they can handle that there. And they've actually recently, if you see up in the top here, the little, the greater than the kind of command line looking thing here. If you click on that, a PowerShell or Bash command will open up, so you can actually online from the web console do scripted or command line based operations. So they're really doing some cool stuff that's up there. They've innovated more in their console than AWS. I'm hoping AWS will have an update sometime soon, just because I don't know, it's pretty basic. Okay, almost starting to wrap up here. So this, from a security side, one area that and both this is just off experience and kind of looking around, even some more in preparation for this. Microsoft has this Azure Security Center. They have it for Office 365 as well, so it's kind of contextually based, if you will. But for this one, this provides kind of a default view of security that you can look at for all your instances in Azure. They do have a management suite, an operations management suite that goes even deeper and works with on-prem computers as well. And we actually do it with customers that are running in AWS, so it doesn't really matter. But built into Azure itself, you get to go in here, and it gives you information like which virtual machines are trying to get hacked into the most. So it gives you that kind of extra bit of security. Both vendors have tons of compliance offerings. Both of them, you can get compliance reports online, and I also put support for Microsoft because you can get even more detailed information from them there. Security integration with your service. With AWS, you really have to use third-party solutions to kind of get it to the part where Microsoft with Security Center really has a more complete solution out of the box. I would say today, because there might be some other things coming on the AWS side, but I think this just is a representation of Microsoft's long history in the enterprise space, and then just knowing inherently to put more of these capabilities in there. It's still shifting. There's still areas of improvement. I think you still need other third-party services and technologies to really round out the solution. Because while Microsoft's providing all the tools, there's still other resources you need to have a more finished solution. So this is just a quick little worksheet. It's nothing too crazy, but I think it gives you an idea of the things that you need to go do when figuring out which platform you need to pick, right? A lot of these things I've talked about today. What is my staff's existing knowledge base? Is my staffing number and skill sets going to remain the same or change in the future? If it's going to be this, if I have 3 people who I love, they're great, we're never going to get rid of them, their preferences also matters. Their knowledge base also matters, because now if I said, I'm just going to go to AWS, but it's not as intuitive, doesn't integrate as much, that could be a very costly thing in terms of training, capabilities, the level of service, and you may need to go with somebody like us to kind of augment that, or you have to send them to special training to get them there, but it takes time to build up good experience to run a production. If your staffing is changing, their preference is less required. But knowledge and training, not just for your IT team, but your business people as well, because now they have to think a little bit differently. It's just not go buy boxes, it's just not add more compute capacity to some degree. It's I need to think of the service. Is there a service available for this? How are we going to run that service? Do we just buy the service? So new things that they have to take into account, and you really should judge them as fairly as you can towards both vendors, somewhat in a neutral manner, right? And then say, but all these should be based off of either hard numbers that soft numbers that you get from a POC, and the alignment that you would need for your existing strategy. So before you do any of this, obviously in the business world, you really want to have a clear view of where is your business going and how is IT going to be impacted on that, and they should be aligned. It's not always that easy. I get it, right? Well, we're going to be changing our manufacturing. Oh, okay. Well, if you're going to do that, who are the vendors? Where are they dispersed? Are there any legal requirements? All these things will shake out kind of your main business and technical requirements. That makes it so much easier. Like if you came to Agile IT and said, hey, can you help us with this? Yes. Oh, you have these things already? Perfect. We can look at these things and help you compare the different vendors to kind of get you towards a place to make a decision, because it's really your decision for your business. But all of these things really need to be taken into account, and each one has a larger amount of time you need for both. So I'll tell you what we do for customers. We kind of take them through not just this one process, but kind of phases of processes that you need to go through. The one thing I will say for customers is, in the very beginning, as early as you possibly can, look at your licensing. Your licensing will have a big impact on your existing licensing, how you existing license Windows, how you existing license Oracle, how you existing license, any integration software that you have. That can be a big dictator to what you can do in the future. The one thing you don't want to do is do a proof of concept. You pick a vendor, you love it, then you look at the license and you go, oh, it's going to be too expensive. And it really kind of, you know, it's not something you want to do towards when you're really getting excited to go into the project. So do that very early, but then you really need to learn it, plan for it, and when you plan as much as you can, even if you don't implement it in the beginning, especially things around security monitoring, service monitoring, you know, management, backup in the resource services. The cost and the process to do all of that can have a profound impact on your experience. You could get going without all of those, but one bad crash without an update, you know, one bad hack, one corrupt piece of data, one unrecoverable backup could make a big impact to, you know, our jobs and our ability to say that this was a good migration. Same thing you'd have to do on-prem, but just don't cheat yourself in the beginning. You can plan it even though you roll it out in different stages. Make sure to get through that. These are things that we have a service called Agile Cover where we do this with our customers, right? We feel equally as responsible for the success and the road mapping for this as they do. And so things that they're saying, well, they don't want to go do, we try and get really loud and say, no, you should do these things. And we try and be as cohesive as we can with other technologies that sometimes they don't work with one another. We're there to help kind of do the integration. So I know I said I wasn't going to sell, but this is important, right? That you need somebody to do this. Either you're doing it and you need somebody to come in and validate. So just if you're doing it, get somebody to come validate. So you can do it, a third party, or you can call us, and we'd love to partner and to help. So change is coming. You know, product retirements, products going out of date are impacting the need for change. It's just not like, oh, I need to go do the cloud trend. You know, cloud is not a trend. Cloud isn't a strategy. Cloud is a piece of your overall tool set to make your business successful. It's just there. So it's not about making a cloud decision. It's, you know, using my tool that I need to. So it's there. You know, just as an example, this will change how you train. Gone are the days of somebody who is like, oh, I've been doing SQL Server 2000 for the last 5 years. I'm a pro, everything about it. Well, you can't say that now in a virtual machine that's running in Azure or a database that's running in AWS, because that thing is changing every month. The process change, the tools change, the performance gets better, the performance characteristics change. So you can't leverage data from 3 years ago. You can leverage a process. You can leverage tools for automation because those normally stay somewhat up to date, but you're not going to have those 3-year experts anymore, which is kind of good, right? It allows you to stay fresh and keep up to date. It does mean that your IT people have to learn to deal with change, something that Agile IT we deal with a lot, and it's great because you get people who like to learn, like to be on the latest, and kind of go that route. So I know I went through a lot of things. Hopefully this has been informative to you. Like I said, the kind of what's next is you need to go through readiness assessment and planning. That's what we call it. The words are pretty easy to know. And you need to do that for vendor one if you already know, like, hey, we already went through our licensing, it's going to be this. Or, well, based off of how we make decisions, we're going to pick that. If you already know it, great. We can help you either way. If you don't know it and you need help kind of learning them and kind of a strategy to go through it, including, you know, reviewing your license and working together with you, and we work with other people who have other partners because they have somebody who's doing their database, somebody who's doing their application, and we can kind of organize and draw it together. Either way, it needs to happen. But hopefully, you know, through this session, we've talked about some of these core things around looking at the licensing and your people and your staff and your skills and really looking at your business alignment to make those decisions. So hopefully we've, you know, shared some information. I think we have a question that's in here now. I think I saw an answer from Dan. So really the next step is, you know, reach out to us if you need to. Hopefully this has been informative. Again, I appreciate your time. I think we have a question. Let's see here. Just give me 1 second.
I think I got all of them just now. I hope.
Yeah, I think Dan. You want to review a couple of these?
Yeah, basically, I think the one that's most pertinent to this conversation is the conversation about using Direct Connect and Express Route, and you're kind of seeing how our customers are adopting that technology. And typically, you know, what we're seeing is most of our customers, you know, they want to get their feet wet first, so they just set up, you know, the standard virtual network gateway, do site-to-site tunnel, get a few VMs up in there, and then once they kind of get more comfortable with the platform, they see that it's secure, that it's stable, that they can leverage it. for applications workloads that they're developing or already running in-house. That typically, probably like a 3 to 6 month, trial period. After that, then we start having conversations about, do you need an express route connection to your on-prem, data center, your colo, to get you that higher performance and possibly replication. So yeah, it's typically a trial period followed by a conversation about getting that installed in the environment. So
cool. There was a question around that might be interesting for you to also share, Dan, around do your customer ask for off-cloud copy backups of their data in the cloud?
Oh, yeah. So my answer to that is basically whether it's Azure or AWS, you have geo-redundant storage options, and typically that satisfies the backup requirement that your data exists in 2 geographically distinct locations. So between that and then you have a lot of hot and cold storage options so that you can do your long-term, 7 years or 10 years of storage that no one's ever going to use. You can put that into cold storage, save some money on your storage costs, and typically because of it's all handled by these tools that are built into the cloud. We don't have people saying, "Oh, can I get this data on tape so that I can go ship it to Iron Mountain?" Typically it's "Hey, I'm tired of shipping my data out to Iron Mountain. Can I just do this in the cloud and not have to deal with this anymore?" So yeah, we don't really see too many people asking for an on-prem copy of their backups.
Cool. Okay. Awesome. Well, if there's any other questions, feel free to ask. We'll hold on for a minute. If not, I appreciate everybody's time. I believe we're going to send out an email just so you can give us some additional feedback, or please feel free to send your feedback here in the form of a question, if you will. I'm not saying it's Jeopardy, but just put it in there. And again, appreciate your time, and hopefully if you have other questions or anything we can help you with, just reach out. You can go to our website and fill out a form there at agilet.com. Or send an email to sales@agilet.com. Those guys are great, and they work with customers all the time to kind of navigate you towards the right way and then get you access to some of our engineers. Well, doesn't look like we have any other questions, so thank you very much, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.